Tonight, the final face-off.
We need a mayor who's going to bring us together, not someone who's going to be a fear-monger.
He makes promises that he knows he can't keep.
Joe Lhota.
My campaign has always been about the issues that matter to New Yorkers.
Bill de Blasio.
If you want progressive change, I'm your candidate.
The issues, their vision, your vote. From News 4 New York, this is a special presentation, Decision 2013, the New York City mayoral debate, jointly sponsored by NBC4 New York, Telemundo Nueva York, The Wall Street Journal, and the New York City Campaign Finance Board.
Welcome to the last debate before Tuesday's election. Good evening, everyone. I'm David Ushery. This is an official city debate administered by the New York City Campaign Finance Board. The CFB runs the city's landmark public matching funds program, which strengthens the role of average New Yorkers' small contributions and makes the candidates less dependent on large donors. The nonpartisan objective criteria for participation in this debate were set months in advance. Joining me this evening as co-moderator is News 4 New York's government affairs reporter, Melissa Russo.
David, thank you. And we're also joined by our panelists, Jorge Ramos of Telemundo Nueva York and Michael Howard Saul of The Wall Street Journal. And now let's meet the candidates who met the criteria for this debate. Republican Joe Lhota, the former chair of the MTA and former deputy mayor, and Democrat Bill de Blasio, New York's public advocate. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
We have a few rules, gentlemen. You'll have 60 seconds to answer most questions. Rebuttals will be limited to 30 seconds. Some questions will be directed at one specific candidate, but the opponent will be allowed to weigh in. And for those of you at home, tweet us throughout the debate using the hashtag NYC2013. We're ready. You're ready. Let's begin. Melissa?
All right, David. 1 year ago, Hurricane Sandy swept through New York City, killing at least 44 people in the 5 boroughs and disrupting transit and power systems, destroying thousands of homes. Many Sandy victims are still struggling. Drawing on your experience in the private or public sectors, what qualifies you to lead the city through a disaster and its aftermath? We begin with Mr. Lhota.
Thank you, Melissa. You know, last night I spent a lot of time in the Rockaways, had a couple of candlelight vigils, and you know, one thing came up over and over again, and I thought about it a lot. The city of New York was not fully prepared for what happened a year ago. They were prepared for the evacuation, but not for the aftermath. The lack of preparation, the lack of planning, to me, is something that needs to happen. When I was running the MTA at that same time, we planned for any type of an emergency, whether it was a terrorist-related or Mother Nature-related, so that we were able to get our system back up and running, both the subways as well as the commuter rail lines. The lack of planning is what is critical and what needs to happen in the city of New York. Quite honestly, I had planning exercises all throughout the summer in the event something did happen. The key to it, though, was bringing the union workers to the table. They are the ones who deserve all of the credit for it. Let me be very honest with you. You know, I actually believe that one of the worst things that you can have in a situation like this is lack of planning and, quite honestly, making promises that you can't meet. That is the worst position you could possibly be in a crisis.
Mr. de Blasio.
Well, I went through Sandy like all of us did, and my office was deeply involved in the response. And I think what we've learned is that we need to prepare people on the ground in advance. We need to prepare grassroots organizations, faith organizations, people at the grassroots level to respond because, in fact, they were the first responders in so many cases. I think that I agree with Joe Lhota, a lot more planning at the city level and at the agency level as well. A lot more pre-positioning of assets that people can access, including those neighborhood organizations and grassroots organizations that often didn't have access to supplies in this crisis. But the bottom line is, having been through it at the grassroots level, I have come to realize how much more we have to do to serve people quickly and to work with people who can get the response to neighbors much more quickly than, for example, the National Guard, which takes a while to arrive. I also think we have an advantage now because we went through the tragedy of Sandy, and it was a painful tragedy. And yes, thousands and thousands of New Yorkers are still suffering from it, and we owe them a lot more support. But we learned a lot in the process, and the mayor presented a resiliency plan that I actually think is the right blueprint for moving forward.
Several viewers have emailed us wanting to know your specific priorities for helping storm victims. So I want to ask, what's the first thing you would change about how the city is helping storm victims? And can you give us one unique idea to protect the city from future storms? Mr. de Blasio, we'll start with you.
Well, what I'd change is two things I'd have to say. First is to make sure that we get benefits to people who haven't gotten them. So many people are still waiting on FEMA benefits. So many people are still waiting on private insurance companies to deliver what people actually deserve and have deserved for months. I think the city government has to play an active role in getting those benefits to people much more expeditiously. I think the thing that is clear to me that's an opportunity for us to do better is to make sure that with the money coming in from the federal government, we got a very gratifying new announcement of additional federal funding the other day, and I commend Senator Schumer for his efforts. That money has to achieve many goals simultaneously. We have to get people back in their homes. We also have to make sure that the work associated with the recovery and with preparing us for the future goes to people who were affected in as many cases as possible. Look, folks who went through Sandy experienced tremendous economic dislocation. And we owe it to them to try and get them some economic opportunities in the work of recovery and preparing for a more resilient future.
Okay, Mr. Loda.
First thing I will do is reinvigorate the Office of Emergency Management. OEM was created to be the incident commander in the event that there's any kind of natural disaster. Reshifting its focus back in 2002, I think, was a huge mistake. It should have been in charge. It should have been on the ground, not just for the evacuation, but during the storm and immediately after. One of the things that you see in the South Shore of Staten Island, or you see in the Rockaways, very, very quickly, is that everybody said the city didn't show up right away. The city should have been the first one on the scene. You know, the Red Cross didn't show up until Friday. You need someone in charge and having an incident commander there. As far as resiliency is concerned, the mayor's proposal regarding resiliency needs to be implemented. It's out there. It's a great plan. It's a great roadmap. We need to start understanding what we need to do to protect not only our human assets, but also our capital assets.
Gentlemen, our next question will come from Michael Howard Saul of the Wall Street Journal.
So there's been some talk about the Rockaways here, and so we have a follow-up question for you, Mr. de Blasio. The Wave, which is a newspaper out in the Rockaways, recently put your face on a milk carton to illustrate your lack of presence there. And the lead of a story in the Staten Island Advance recently said, "Where you been?" And since primary day, your public schedule shows that you've been to the Bronx very few times. And the Bronx, as you know, is the city's poorest borough. So given your post-primary schedule, is it fair for voters to question your commitment to the neighborhoods outside of Manhattan and your home base in Brooklyn?
Well, as a Brooklynite, I think I've made very clear throughout this campaign how devoted I am to changing our approach to government, to making sure it's a government for all 5 boroughs. This is something I've not only talked about throughout this last year, I've acted on it as public advocate and as a city councilman before that. I have represented an outer borough neighborhood, a set of neighborhoods, throughout my public career. And my focus is on everyday New Yorkers who live in neighborhoods all over the outer boroughs who often haven't gotten the support they need from City Hall, and that certainly includes people in Staten Island and people in the Bronx. I have to tell you, if you look at the course of this campaign, we've had, I think, over 70 forums and debates in every part of the city. I have spent a lot of time in Staten Island, a lot of time in the Bronx over the course of this last year, and I will continue to do that if the people choose me on November 5th as their mayor. I really don't think this city revolves around Midtown and, you know, big office buildings and skyscrapers. I think this city is about our people, and that's how I have spent my time as public advocate, and that's how I've run this campaign as well.
Okay. Let's look to the future.
Mr. Loda, did you want to weigh in on that?
I would. You know, I go to all 5 boroughs as frequently as I can. As mayor, I want to be the mayor of all New York. Being in Manhattan all the time is not the right way. One of the things that we've learned in the 3rd term of Mike Bloomberg is that we need to go out, we need to listen to the people, we need to go into the boroughs, we need to go into the neighborhoods and really listen to the people. I will reinvigorate and start again having town hall meetings, one a month, where I bring all my deputy mayors, all of my commissioners, sit there from 6 to 9 o'clock at night in the largest auditorium that we can find and answer all of the questions that the public wants to hear.
All right. Let's look to the future for this next question. Your opponent has won the election, and it's 2 years into his term. What does New York City look like under your opponent's administration? Mr. Loda, you're up first.
Well, you know, I've tried to describe that in numerous advertisements. I believe Bill's proposals are quite naive, and they actually will turn us back to a time that we don't want to go to. There will be an increase in crime. Even the New York Times, when they endorsed him on Sunday, actually said, expect an increase in crime. Quite honestly, I also believe that we will have a situation where if he's successful in raising a tax, if he can't get the tax in Albany, he'll tax something else because he's shown no propensity whatsoever to cut spending. And we need to find a way to recreate the intensity that we used to have in the city of New York. when it comes to finding ways to stretch the dollars quickly. In all honesty, you know, I believe that, and I mean this, that the streets will be unsafe. Our schools will be still failing because he wants to prevent parental choice. And I actually believe that we need to give parents choice. They know more about what their children's needs are going to be than the city of New York. And quite honestly, his propensity for spending. I think not taking care of the city's FISK is going to be a huge problem.
Mr. de Blasio, a response to that?
Well, first I have to set the record straight. I was honored to receive the endorsement of the New York Times. And my opponent has a propensity for mischaracterizing things. The New York Times, in fact, commended me for the policies I've suggested in terms of how we remain safe, but also create more fairness and more respect between police and community. So that endorsement by the New York Times, in fact, laid out specifically the balance we can and will strike. My opponent has continued throughout this campaign to fail to recognize the achievements of the men and women of the NYPD. We have gotten safe for a reason over the last 20 years. We're going to continue to stay safe and, in fact, get safer. If you ask the question now, what would it look like, this city, if my opponent were to win? It would look in many ways, in terms of the problems we're facing, the 46% of New Yorkers at or near the poverty level, the affordable housing crisis, the problems between police and community, it would look very much the same as today. A lot of the problems that we're experiencing right now that have gone unaddressed by Mayor Bloomberg would go unaddressed by Mr. Lota. If you look at his platform, it's abundantly clear he wants to continue a lot of the failed policies of Mayor Bloomberg.
If I heard Mr. de Blasio correctly, that I have, over the last 20 years, have not had respect for the men of the men and women of the NYPD. Look, I was out there making sure that City Council didn't pass the Community Safety Act. I was out there proposing to the mayor that they actually go back to the courts and stop what's gone on with Judge Heinlein's ruling and make sure that we want to appeal it. Look, I have done everything to support the men and women of the NYPD. I will continue to do that. They are the key to making sure that we keep our streets safe. I am not satisfied with the status quo right now when it comes to crime. Crime's got to get even lower.
But let's be clear. He made clear in his now famous advertisement that he believes that we will slip backward into a state that we experienced 30 years ago or more. And that says to me that he doesn't understand how much has been done over the last 20 years by the men and women of the NYPD, by community leaders, to make this city safe. Don't believe me, believe Bill Bratton, who said the other day, our former commissioner, said exactly this same point. It seems strange that Mr. Lota would ignore all those accomplishments and how much is going to be constant in any administration, because we have made that progress, because the CompStat system is
just a very quick response. Anybody who believes that the accomplishments that have happened over the last 20 years are not fragile is kidding themselves. Crime can go back up again. Look with the crime reduction in Chicago, now it's even higher. Believe me, with policies like Mr. de Blasio has, crime will go up.
Well, John is going to be able to elaborate on those issues even further in just a moment, but we want to take time out to remind everyone there to use the hashtag NYC 2013. Tweet us if there's a question you think the candidates did not fully answer, or if you have a question for the candidates. We're going to try to add your questions to our 30-minute bonus round, and that begins at 8 o'clock, airing online and on cable channels Cozy and WNYE. Also, keep an eye at the bottom of your screen there. We're going to roll through some real-time reaction to our debate from some of the area journalists who've been covering the campaign. All right, we'll continue now and talk a little bit about public safety with the anchor from Telemundo Nueva York, Jorge Ramos.
Thank you, David. You both were talking right now about crime, and violent crime has fallen to record lows under Mayor Michael Bloomberg. How will you keep that trend going, Mr. de Blasio?
You know, we have 34,000 plus of the best police officers on earth. I want to keep that number stable. 1,000 of them are devoted to anti-terrorism duty. That has to stay that way as well. We have better technology than we've ever had, and we have to keep using it. Surveillance cameras and other approaches that can be pinpointed to neighborhoods where there's particular problems. A huge advantage, the shot spotter technology that allows us to pinpoint where a shot has come from so we can get enforcement on the scene immediately. We have so much to work with now that will continue to make us safe, even safer. The gang intervention strategies that are only just beginning to be used in the city that literally stop young people from getting involved in gangs from the beginning. Working with family, working with clergy and community leaders to keep young people from ever going down that road. By the way, the plan I've called for after-school programs for every middle school child in the city will also keep young people away from those negative influences. So I think we have so much to work with. What we need to fix is the problem, the rift between police and community in a lot of our neighborhoods. That happened because of the unconstitutional use of stop and frisk, the over use of stop and frisk. We can fix that, and that will make us safer for the long run.
Thank you. Mr. Lothar,
To
how
make
will
our-
you keep that trend going?
I'm sorry?
How will you keep that trend going?
No, you need to keep the trend going by making sure that you evaluate and reevaluate all of the tactics and all of the strategies that the police department uses. One of the things that I've learned over the last 20 years is the police department wants to stay one step ahead of the criminal element, going to the source of where the problem is. You don't go after the guys who are robbing the cars. You go after the guys who are fencing the cars in the chop shops so that there's no place to actually have it there. We need to continue making sure that illegal guns are taken off the street. We are actually seeing an increase in violence in the city of New York. We cannot let that happen. What we need to do is to reinvigorate the spirit of the police department. Yes, we need to enhance the communications and the relationship between the communities and the NYPD. And quite honestly, Ray Kelly, by virtue of the fact that right now the police department, at least after the next class, will be 52% officers of color. That goes a long way in making sure that the police department understands exactly what's going on in the community. It's an encouraging sign, something that Ray Kelly never gets credit for.
Well, gentlemen, let's talk. You just said, Mr. Lothar, that we have to reevaluate the tactics of the NYPD. So let's talk a little bit about stop and frisk. It's been a big discussion during the campaign, obviously the subject of a lot of ads. So we want the viewers to leave with a kind of clearer understanding of where you both stand. We have a different question for each of you. So let's begin with Mr. Lothar. Most of the people stopped by police officers in New York are black or Latino, and 90% of the people stopped aren't arrested. If 9 out of 10 stops don't find wrongdoing, how is that a good strategy for New York?
Well, you know, tomorrow is actually the 50th anniversary of the situation in Ohio where Terry was arrested. Here's what happened. See, they went forward and they actually looked at someone who thought that they were going to be robbing a building and robbing a jewelry store. It looked suspicious. The Supreme Court said if you get 5 levels of suspicious activity and you can stop anyone for it, suspicious activity is not a crime. If they have not committed a crime after you've had stop, then question, and if necessary, frisk, they're not going to be arrested. We should also know that stop, question, and frisk has gone down by 40% in the last year. There's been retraining and retraining of the NYPD, where I think what I know they need to do is they also have to tell the community how the cops have been trained and what to do and what not to do. It is so important that the community understands what the Supreme Court and the Justice Department allows the NYPD and cops all across the United States to do. Look, we need to get control of stop, question, and frisk. No doubt about it. But it is a tool that must continue.
Mr. de Blasio, you've said that you will end the era of racial profiling in stop and frisk, but you've also said, look, stop and frisk won't go away completely. So if you were to win in your administration, what would the policy be in terms of stop and frisk and the NYPD? What would you tell your commissioner? And how would the public know that something has changed?
Right. Well, I'd like to give a little bit clearer answer than the one I just heard, because, in fact, if you look at what Mr. Lothar has said in the course of this campaign, if you look at his platform, it doesn't really suggest a profoundly different approach. What I'm saying is this: 90% of people who have stopped, according to NYPD statistics, 90% are innocent in every way, shape, or form. Federal judge has said that the approach being used right now is unconstitutional in most cases. So what I think we have to do is go back to the fundamental notion of stop and frisk as a valid police tactic when done constitutionally. For example, when there's a specific suspect description, and that description is the reason why someone is stopped. I think if we use the CompStat system to use as a management tool to make sure that precinct commanders know they should use stop and frisk as constitutionally appropriate in specific instances, and use it as needed according to their local conditions, I think you're going to see the numbers go down a lot, and you're going to see people at the community level starting to see not only the change in terms of reduction of numbers, but see why it is being used when it is used. And that's going to restore a lot of the confidence and dialogue between police community. One last point: if you don't have that dialogue, the police lose out on some of the best leads of where the criminals are, where the weapons are. That's what police want the most, that information from communities that really lead them to finding criminals and weapons.
I'm sorry you thought my answer was mumbled, but let me be quite honest with you and tell you what my proposal is. My proposal says, yes, we must continue stop, question, and frisk. Yes, we must make sure that the community understands what they're allowed to do. Yes, the police officers need to be trained. And the most important part, There is no room for racial profiling in this city. If a cop is accused and found guilty of racial profiling, that police officer will lose their job.
So I just want to be clear, Mr. Loader, you think that 90% number is too high with no arrests, mostly black and Latinos, and how it creates some alienation in some communities? Do you think
it's hard to tell? You need to look at the 250s and understand what was the suspicious activity that the officers saw. And and once you see that and then understand it, look, if a kid's going down the street and he's opening up a car door, tries to, goes to the next car, he opens up a car door, doesn't open. You see him open up a third car. That's suspicious activity. You stop that person. And then you talk to them and you ask them what they're doing. And you know what? He didn't do anything wrong. He's not going to be arrested. Was that suspicious activity that the Supreme Court said is suspicious activity? Absolutely. But that kid doesn't get arrested. That's why we have stop, question, and frisk. It is a proactive policing tool the Supreme Court gave police officers all throughout the United States in 1969.
All right, we have
Let me
quick
be
response,
clear.
Mr.
Well,
Barr.
he wants to keep the same police commissioner in place and the same policies in place. Let's be clear. They've been deemed unconstitutional by a federal judge, and there's a de facto quota system. And talk to everyday cops. Beat cops. Talk to them off record, and they will say they have been forced to live under a de facto quota system for the stops, and it has hurt their ability to communicate and have a partnership with community members so they can fight crime.
All right, well, another issue has emerged in recent days, and Melissa has a question about that.
Several black customers have complained of being detained and harassed by police while shopping in department stores in New York City, and now the Attorney General is investigating. What would you say to shoppers who feel that they are being racially profiled at high-end retailers? Mr. Loda, we start with you.
There's no room for racial profiling in the city of New York. If a store racially profiles, that store should be punished. That person who ordered it to happen should lose their job, if not be also punished in some way, shape, or form. Look, racial profiling is not allowed. Shopping while black should not be a situation in which someone gets arrested or detained because somebody thinks they don't have the wherewithal to pay for the belt involved. My goodness, enough of this. No more racial profiling. It needs to stop.
And does the NYPD have a role in this as well?
Look, the situation is still being investigated right now. The NYPD says they received a report from Barney's, and they responded to the report from Barney's, was given information that somebody may have had a stolen credit card. That's how they got involved. But it starts with the store. They're the ones who made the accusation. They're the ones who have to justify it.
Right, and I think the stores are not admitting that at this point, if that is the case. Mr. de Blasio, your answer?
Well, I think we have some real common ground here. It's absolutely unacceptable. If the stores are directing this kind of activity, it has to stop immediately, or there obviously will be consequences. But we need to know more about the NYPD role as well. Look, the bottom line is that a law-abiding individual goes into a Macy's or a Barney's, takes out a credit card, buys something, and then they're stopped like they're a suspect to a crime when they're doing the same thing as all the shoppers around them. That's not allowable in the city of New York in the year 2013. So whoever is responsible, there has to be a consequence, and it has to stop right away.
And are you troubled by the police department's role?
I don't know enough. We're all waiting for more details, both from the stores and from the NYPD, but I'll say it this way. Whoever is responsible, whichever combination is responsible, it's not allowable.
Michael Howard Saul.
Let's talk taxes. We have two questions, one for each of you. Mr. Loda, you have pledged tax reform. Can you tell us tonight, if elected, which New Yorkers will see their taxes go down, and how will you make up for that loss in revenue?
Sure. The first taxes to go down is going to be the property tax. We have to reevaluate our assessed values. Our assessed values have gone up so much, it's really the middle class that is being hurt very, very much. I've also put forward an evaluation of some of our corporate taxes that need to go down so long as they create jobs. That's what I wrote in my report. I didn't say I'd do it automatically, I'd do it over time. How am I going to do it? I'm going to do it by making the government more efficient. I've talked about this many, many times. There are hundreds of different ways to make the government more efficient. First one, look, we have 5 pension systems in the city of New York right now. I will work with the unions to merge them all together. Each one of those pension systems has a president, has a general counsel, has a deputy general counsel, an investment officer, investment advisors, procurement officers. You know what? Merge them all together, merge their computer systems together. You save $100 million a year. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples like that that have failed to happen during this current administration that I will do because I did it before, both when I was budget director and when I was deputy mayor.
Mr. de Blasio, quickly, do you think that's a good tax plan?
No, I think that's trickle-down economics. I think that's a classic Republican plan. He wants to give tax breaks to corporations. Now, the history is when you give tax breaks to corporations, the taxpayers lose out. The everyday people of the city lose out. We usually don't get back what a lot of those corporations pledge to us. So I think we've learned very, very well that what we do nowadays, we don't continue to give tax breaks to the wealthy. We don't continue to give tax breaks to corporations. In fact, Mr. Loda's plan, according to the New York Times, would blow a $2 billion hole in our budget. What I think we should do is income tax increase for 5 years on those who make $500,000 or more so we can fix our schools. Full-day pre-K and after school for middle school kids.
So glad you mentioned that. Speaking of that, you have promised to expand pre-kindergarten, but that proposal, of course, is dependent upon Albany agreeing during an election year to increase taxes on New Yorkers who are making $500,000 or more. Simply put, yes or no, do you have a plan B if Albany rejects this tax proposal?
Well, you know, you and others have asked this question before, and I have a very, very simple response. We intend to pass this. Anyone who's a leader doesn't start talking about plan Bs, plan Cs. You talk about your vision and how you're going to get it done. You know, you saw some comments yesterday from Albany, from key leaders in Albany, acknowledging that full-day pre-K is a major priority in this city, in this state, and something we have to act on. I think you've seen a lot of support citywide for what I'm talking about, particularly among the 1.8 million parents who are parents of New York City public school kids. So I think we're going to have tremendous public support. And the history in Albany is simple. Mayors have gone to Albany and asked for a right to develop our own revenue here in the city. And the last 3 mayors have gone and gotten the approval of Albany, and I intend to continue that pattern.
So just to be clear, there is no plan B, correct?
There's a lot of things we're going to do to fix the schools beyond creating full-day pre-K for every child, beyond creating after school for every middle school child. There are a host of other reforms, getting away from standardized testing, increasing teacher morale, improving parental involvement, improving teacher retention. There's a whole host of things in my platform to make our schools better. But when it comes to full-day pre-K and after school, my intention is to get it done next year in 2014.
Okay, sounds like no. Mr. Loda, do you have a problem with this?
Yeah, 2 issues. Number one, Mr. de Blasio said that leaders don't have a plan B. You know why he says something like that? He has no management experience whatsoever. He's never managed anything but political campaigns and a public advocate's office. Let me tell you, real leaders not only have a plan B, but they have a plan C. What you really need to know is what is your goal and how do you achieve it. If plan A doesn't work, you go to B, you go to C. That's not only the real sign of leadership, that is the ultimate sign of leadership, quite honestly. Second, look, he just laid out all types of proposals that he wants to do with this tax increase. Last week, it was just going to be pre-K. And then we found out during the debate it was going to happen over 5 years. Now it's afternoon. Now it's other school-related things. Believe me when I tell you this. Believe me when I tell you this.
Oh, wait, we have to
you want to talk about high taxes on individuals that make a lot of money? It'll trickle down to the middle class. He already said 3 mayors have gone to Albany in the past to try to get other sources of funding.
We've got
Listen to his words.
We've got a lot of ground to cover. 15 seconds.
A year ago, in front of the Association for Better New York, I laid out a plan. It was 5 years. It was for after school and for early child education for full-day pre-K. A year ago. It is well reported. So the fact that Mr. Loda doesn't seem to understand what the plan is and that it's been on the table for a year, that is his mistake. But as to the question of leadership, leaders create a vision, get the people to buy into the vision, and then go achieve the vision. You don't bargain against yourself. You don't come out and say, well, I don't know if my vision will make it. You put forward a clear, positive vision, and then you work to get it done.
There's another issue of education important to the viewers who wrote into us. Jorge has this question.
Thank you, David. This next question is for both of you. The old Board of Education has been abolished. Right now, the mayor has control of schools. Some feel too much control. In 2015, when Albany has to once again reauthorize mayoral control of schools, will you support renewing it, and will you propose changes? Mr. de Blasio.
I do support renewing mayoral control of education. I'm a public school parent myself. I have been for the last 14 years. If I'm elected mayor, I will literally be the first mayor in the history of the city to serve while having a child in public schools. So I care deeply and very personally about this. But mayoral control is a better system than what we had before. The problem is Mayor Bloomberg implemented it in a way that didn't pay attention to the needs and the concerns of parents, that in many cases made decisions without asking any of the stakeholders involved what the ramifications would be, and that's why so many of those decisions failed. I want to see a different approach to mayoral control. I want to see that central board, the panel on education policy, yes, have a mayoral majority, but with set terms, so the individual members have the freedom to actually speak their mind and question policies that they think may not be good enough and look for revisions and changes. I want to see our community education councils have a more prominent role in decisions and closing of schools and co-locations. They've been shut out of that process, and a lot of those decisions, therefore, by the current administration, failed or created a lot of tension in communities because community members had no role in those decisions. We have to get back to giving community members a real role.
Thank you. Mr. Loda.
I agree that the mayoral control is the right direction to go in. The Board of Education was dysfunctional. And I also agree that what's happened in the current administration with all of the centralized decision-making, it's left out the parents, it's left out the community, it's left out leaders in the community. We need to so much listen to what they have to say. As I said earlier, parents know more about what their kids need than the Department of Education does. And we need to reorganize their decision-making process. I also agree that for those folks who are on the board, they should be set at a certain term so that they're not subject to political pandering.
Michael, you had a quick question on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to find out whether or not you agreed with the de Blasio proposal to do a set term, but it sounds like you do.
I do agree with a set term.
All right, that's our kumbaya moment. We had our kumbaya moment for this debate too now.
All right, Melissa has a question.
Can we sing?
Yes, I think we should.
Right, sure.
I think it would reduce viewership immediately if we were to sing, though.
All right, we'll keep that one in our back pocket.
Yeah.
When
Melissa could sing. She's much better.
Thank you.
She is.
When we asked viewers what questions they wanted to ask in this debate, the most popular topic was the future of New York City charter schools. And Mr. Loda, you've called for the number of charter schools to be doubled. Mr. de Blasio, you don't support that approach. Why is your approach to charter schools best for New York City? Let's start with Mr. de Blasio.
Because what we need to do is fix our public schools in general. 95% of our kids go to traditional public schools. We have so much we have to do to fix those schools. It starts with full-day pre-K for every child and after-school programs for middle school kids. It runs through fixing our situation with teacher retention and keeping good teachers here, deeply increasing the amount of parental involvement. There's a whole host of things we have to focus on to make our schools work better for everyone. Charter schools, I've said clearly, they're 5% or so of our kids right now. And I'd keep the cap we have, and I'd work with the many charters that are doing a good job, and I'd be very tough on the charters that aren't doing such a good job and aren't representative of the districts in which they exist. I simply wouldn't favor charters the way Mayor Bloomberg did, because in the end, our city rises or falls on our traditional public schools, and we're simply not doing enough to make them better. And I think one of the things I've heard in this campaign is tremendous support for the notion that we need to make the right kind of investments to actually change the status quo, starting with early child education and after school.
Mr. Loda?
As you all know, I want to double the number of charter schools, but I don't want to do that at the expense of the rest of the school system. As mayor, I'll be responsible for 1.1 million children and making sure that they get a great education, an excellent education. In all honesty, I will spend more time not on the charter schools, but on the regular schools. They need to change. They're not working right now. I believe a failing school needs to close. Not allowing students to stay in a failing school is immoral. We must close failing schools, reconstitute them as new schools. I can do more than one thing at a time. It's not, do you do charters or do you do regular schools? You have to do a lot of things as mayor. And one of the things that I know is that in the education system, it's going to require a lot of work. I will select a chancellor who had actually taught in a classroom, who understands how to teach a child and mold their mind, but most importantly is a change agent who knows when they go into the Board of Education, the old board, now the Department of Education, they clean it out because there's still too much in the middle and not enough money is going back into the classroom.
You know, I have to rebut here, because just one second if I may. On the notion that you have to do many things at a time, by definition, that's what a mayor does. But on the specific issue of education, in the Bloomberg years, we did not address some of the very most fundamental problems. We didn't address early childhood education. A very small number of kids proportionally in this city get full-day pre-K. We didn't address teacher retention. We didn't address parental involvement. We didn't address after school. In fact, after school has been reduced by about 30,000 seats in the last 5 or 6 years. So I think if we're going to talk about all the things we have to do, let's talk about the many things we have to do to fix the schools that serve 95% of our kids. It doesn't mean we shouldn't work with charters as well. It means the cart and the horse are not aligned.
I don't understand why he gets a rebuttal to then say nothing but what Mike Bloomberg did. I'm not Mike Bloomberg, and I'm not going to continue what Mike Bloomberg's done in education. It's really unfair that you use your opportunity to still keep running against Mike Bloomberg. You're running against me. Let's talk about what I want.
Let me explain why I raised it, because I think Mr. Lota failed to talk about the core changes necessary for the 95% of our kids in traditional public schools. I've not heard a realistic plan from him for full-day pre-K for every child in the city, for after-school for middle school kids, for teacher retention, for deeper levels of parental involvement. I haven't heard those things. I've heard him talk a lot about charters and the 5% of kids in charters, and I care about those kids too. But I'd like the debate in this town to shift to the things that really will fix education for the long term.
I'll give you that last point on that, Mr.
My policy book, which is online and everybody can go out and read it, says we need universal pre-K, and I show how it should be done. We actually need more after-school programs. We need to bring back arts education to all schools, not some schools. The same with music and the same with physical education. Listen, he's just making stuff up as he goes along here.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
Listen,
I just have to say, there's no
plan
plan for full-day pre-K, and you want to give $2 billion in tax breaks to corporations.
You've made that point. You have a chance now. As you know, we set aside time for each of you to ask each other a question.
I have several questions.
Right, you only get one at this point, and the response is limited to 60 seconds. So we'll offer the first opportunity to you, Mr. de Blasio, to ask Mr. Lota a question.
Thank you very much. You know, Joe, you were on Morning Joe the other day, and you said three times, that income disparity in this city is not a problem. You said that on national television. It's not a problem. I want to verify, do you actually believe it's not a problem? And what do you say to the 46% of New Yorkers living at or near the poverty level, what they're going through now? What do you say to them about that?
You know, what's interesting, if you look at the full tape of the Morning Joe show, here's what I said. Income inequality is a problem. Sam Stein asked me a question, isn't just talking about income inequality divisive? And I said, no, it is not. And then I said it again when he tried to say it again. Look, he actually in his IE has put out a commercial saying that I said that it's not a problem. It is absolutely a problem. I have said it throughout the entire campaign, and here's how we deal with it. We need to expand the economy. Bill and I completely disagree about how to create jobs in New York. I will use incentives to create jobs in New York, because at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, the only way to deal with income inequality is to make sure that those who are unemployed have a job, those who are underemployed get a better and possibly a career job. You combine that with job training, and you make sure that the public school system trains our children so that they can actually fill the jobs that are created in New York. Listen, income inequality is a problem, plain and simple.
Mr. Lota, your question for Mr. de Blasio.
Mr. de Blasio, it just came to light the other day that a whistleblower said that during the period of time that you were at HUD, that there was $23 million, multi-million dollars, in scandals and scams that occurred on your watch. Question for you, and well, by the way, they also said, the whistleblower said that you could have been the first line of defense. Tell me, what's changed in your management style and your approach that you would be able to make sure that none of this happened to our $70 billion city budget?
You know, when I worked at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, I was appointed by President Clinton. I served under Secretary Andrew Cuomo, who is now our governor. And I'm very proud of my service there. And Secretary Cuomo focused on weeding out waste, fraud, and abuse in HUD. And at the time we all went into HUD, when he became secretary, there was a tremendous feeling in the Congress that HUD might have outlived its usefulness. Secretary Cuomo and all of us who worked with him turned that agency around, made it more efficient, made it more effective, weeded out the corruption and abuse, so much so that even the Republicans in the Congress came to the defense of HUD ultimately. The issue you raise was reported after I had left the employment of HUD in the Clinton administration. The issues did not come up on my watch, and I'm very proud of my service under President Clinton and Secretary Cuomo.
All right, Michael, you have a question now about homelessness.
Yes, the number of homeless people spending a night in city shelters recently surpassed 51,000, which is now more than the number of seats at Yankee Stadium. That's a 64% increase since 2002 when Mayor Bloomberg took office. Have the Bloomberg administration's policies on homelessness failed? And if so, what specifically would you do differently? Mr. Lota, you're up first.
I think the Bloomberg policies have missed one critical area in dealing with homelessness. first and foremost, we're just housing people. We need to find out what the problem is. For some, especially the families, they really do need housing, and let's help them get the housing and the other public assistance they need. But for those who have other needs, whether it's a drug addiction or alcoholism, we need to, be benevolent as the City of New York and get them fixed, get them back to be mainstreamed into society, go through job training programs, and actually get them back. The City of New York is spending over $1 billion today on the homeless problem in New York, and they're not doing anything about reducing the number of people going into it, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing, and nobody's coming out of it. We need to make sure and treat all the folks who are homeless as humans and give them the services that they need.
But do you want to get rid of the right to shelter, or is that your plan?
The right to shelter has been contested in courts over and over again. Quite honestly, the only thing that I would suggest on shelter is that we should really focus priority on those who are New Yorkers. The idea that, under the Constitution of the State of New York, anybody can come across a bridge or a tunnel and come into New York, and they have the right to shelter. You know what? New York first, and then we'll worry about the others.
Mr. de Blasio, the original question to you, do you think that the Bloomberg administration's policies on homelessness has been a failure, and what would be your plan?
Absolutely and sadly been a failure. We have 51,000 people in shelter. As you said, that's the all-time high. Homelessness is a phenomenon about 30 years old now in our city, and this is the worst it's ever been in terms of the number of people in shelter. For 8 years in the City Council, I was the chairperson of the committee that worked on these issues. For the first 4 years of the Bloomberg administration, I pleaded with the administration to focus on homelessness prevention. There were ways to keep people in their own apartments, to keep families whole, to not let them slip into shelter when they went through an economic dislocation, for example. And by the way, here's the amazing thing. These homelessness prevention programs, for example, you spend $1,000 a month to keep a family in an apartment for a certain period of time, but you spend over $3,000 a month for that same family to be in shelter. And unfortunately, Bloomberg administration policies have allowed more and more families to end up in shelter. The families are the losers and the taxpayers are the losers. I believe in going back to the programs that for a brief time the administration utilized, the anti-eviction legal services, the rental subsidy programs. They abandoned those in 2011, and that's one of the reasons why the shelter population has gone up so high.
All right, a question from Jorge Ramos about jobs.
In poll after poll, voters say they want a mayor who will make creating jobs a top priority. Name your top 3 ideas for creating new jobs, Mr. de Blasio.
Well, the way we're going to create new jobs is not with giveaways to corporations. I can guarantee you that. What I've called for example, is taking away some of the subsidy dollars that have gone historically to corporations, like the $130 million that was given to the Fresh Direct Corporation. That money should be reprogrammed so, for example, our small businesses can have access to a revolving loan fund. Small business is one of the great job creation engines in the city, but small businesses have been starved for the credit they need to expand and create more jobs. My plan would provide them that credit. Another element of that same plan, providing opportunities for more young people and people looking for a new career to go to CUNY, for example, get a 2-year STEM degree, both the money so CUNY can create that program and the money for more financial aid for those currently excluded. That's going to allow people to get jobs in, for example, the tech sector that right now are going wanting. There's great jobs available that New Yorkers can't access for lack of training. Those jobs are going to people from outside the city, outside the country even. We've got to fix that. And finally, the affordable housing plan I've put forward, 200,000 units over the next 10 years, an immense number of construction jobs in that and building maintenance jobs thereafter.
Mr. Lugo.
I totally disagree with Mr. de Blasio because he doesn't understand how jobs are created. Look, without giving that money to Fresh Direct, we would have lost almost 2,100 jobs that would have left and gone to New Jersey. We need to focus on incentives to allow companies to move here and companies to expand here. We should only do it if they promise to create the jobs, and if they don't create the jobs, we take that money back. It's as plain and simple. You need to make that investment to get the jobs in return. Having job training programs, which are very, very important, but having job training programs, and when folks get out of job training programs, there are no jobs. People lose all kinds of hope. You've got to work on both the debit and the credit side of the equation. And quite honestly, I will work with the banks regarding small businesses. I need to sit down with the chairman and CEOs of each one of the banks that are headquartered in here and say, if you want to be a good corporate citizen in this city, ease up on your credit, you are crushing small business in this city. And then finally, we need to actually expand what we've been doing in the high-tech business, the high-tech manufacturing, as well as biotech, to take advantage of the healthcare industry that we have here in New York and the great medical schools that we have.
Two quick responses. One, if we have, again, thousands of jobs right now that New Yorkers are not accessing for lack of training. So in terms of the training programs for tech, it's well documented those jobs are available right now. If the city was doing the right things to help people get those training, those jobs would be in the hands of New Yorkers. And on the small business point, you can go and meet with bank presidents all you want. They haven't been giving credit to small businesses for years now. Why doesn't the city take matters into our own hands and create a revolving loan fund so small businesses can actually get access to credit?
Mr. Bowser, real quick follow-up. When is it appropriate for the city to give tax incentives and breaks to corporations to try to drive the engine? Is it ever appropriate?
Under some circumstances, but very rare. The history is that many of the corporate subsidies have yielded very little in return, and with very little consequence when the corporations didn't keep up their end of the bargain. Look at, on a real estate level, look at Greenpoint Williamsburg in Brooklyn. The deal made there by the Bloomberg administration was supposed to be 3,000 units of affordable housing. All sorts of incentives were provided to the real estate developers involved. Just one problem, only a third of that housing has been built now. So the fact is, we have to be clear that unless there's some kind of consequence built in, a lot of these subsidy deals are not worth doing.
I'm going to give you a few seconds on that, Mr. Lowe.
No, you absolutely need to have consequences built in. We shouldn't do the types of retention deals that have gone on by EDC in the last 12 years. It needs to be performance-based, and if they don't hit the performance targets, we get the money back. Plain and simple.
All right, Melissa Russo.
Mr. de Blasio, you've proposed requiring more businesses to give workers paid sick days and a living wage of about $11.75 an hour. How can you assure voters that these policies won't discourage businesses from operating in New York City?
Well, first of all, we are the strongest market in the country. I mean, let's be clear about this whole discussion about what it's fair to ask of business. We are the strongest market in the country. We're the place that national and international businesses want to be to sell their products. And when we're talking about living wage legislation, it's in the instances in which the city is providing a subsidy to that company. So one, they get to come to the best market there is. Two, they're getting a city subsidy. We say in return, we need you to guarantee that your workers will make either $10 an hour if they get benefits or $11.50 if they don't get benefits. I think that's a pretty small price to ask in return for the opportunities we're affording these businesses.
Mr. Loda, why do you think this policy is misguided?
Well, we have a living wage bill. It passed, what, 3-4 months ago? Let's implement it. There's no reason to change it right away. There's no reason to do legislation after legislation after legislation. What we really need to do is take the living wage bill we have and let's implement it. Let's evaluate it. What works, what doesn't work, and whatever way we want to go, we can expand it, we can decrease it. Either way you can want to do it. The same is true with paid sick leave. We have paid sick leave in New York. It went in place, what, just 9 months ago. Sure, do we need to change it? Let's first evaluate how well it's working. And if we need to enhance it, let's enhance it.
Well, with all due respect to Mr. Lodi, obviously hasn't read the legislation because paid sick leave was voted on, but it hasn't taken effect yet because the legislation phases in over several years. Look, and I've said very clearly, I think paid sick leave is such a crucial benefit that families need. Think about it for a moment. Someone gets sick or their child gets sick, they could lose a week's pay without even blinking. A week's pay for so many people in this city right now, if they lose that, it could put them over the edge economically.
But isn't there a chance that it will discourage businesses from creating new jobs?
So let's talk about the evidence from around the country. We have seen cities and states all over the country put paid sick leave into effect. San Francisco, Seattle, the state of Connecticut, the District of Columbia, more recently Philadelphia. And uniformly in this experience, there has not been the problems that were alleged by the business community. In fact, what we found is that people respect that opportunity. They take advantage of it only when appropriate. But for the people who need it, take, for example, a single mother gets sick and she has to take care, and she has to be off work for a week, or her child gets sick and she has to take care of that child. If she doesn't have the recourse of paid sick leave, it could devastate that family.
You want to know what if you put San Francisco, D.C., and Philadelphia together, you know what they all have in common? They're losing population. Why?
I don't think San Francisco is losing
population.
Absolutely. We want to try to get as many questions as we can, so we're going to try to ask you now to keep your responses to 45 seconds just so we cover more ground. Michael.
Sure.
We knew you'd take our time away at some point here.
Next question. If elected, what benchmarks do you believe need to be met, and please be specific, for you to deserve re-election in 4 years? Mr. de Blasio, you're up first.
I've said throughout this campaign I want to address the inequalities of this city, To me, it would mean that we're doing something very meaningful to increase wages and benefits, including things like paid sick leave and living wage legislation. It would mean that we've gotten children full-day pre-K and after-school programs, that we're steadily increasing that. It would mean that we've repaired the relationship between police and community, and obviously substantial progress on the goal of 200,000 units of affordable housing.
Mr. Loda?
The metrics that I would use would make, first and foremost, is the creation of jobs. And I'm not talking about thousands of jobs like he just did that needs to be filled. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs. I'm also talking about, from a metric point of view, a continuation of the reduction in the 7 major felony areas. As I said before, I am not satisfied with the status quo right now. Crime has to go lower. Third, affordable housing. I've talked about the creation of 150,000 units of affordable housing over 4 years. That is a critical metric that needs to be met.
Melissa.
Many of our viewers have said that they want to know specifically what you will do to prevent senior citizens who are living on fixed incomes from existing in poverty or even being forced to leave the city. Mr. de Blasio, we begin with you.
This is why, you know, when I put together my affordable housing program, I said we need 200,000 units. That's enough, hopefully, to house 400 to 500,000 New Yorkers. There's even a need beyond that, but that's the number I think we can legitimately reach over the next 10 years. A substantial amount of that needs to be dedicated to senior housing, because so many seniors right now are being forced out. You know, some seniors, the only thing they have is their home. They have very, very little income. Some seniors, unfortunately, are renting. They're in a situation where they can barely make the rent because they're on that fixed income. The situation's untenable. The city needs to step in and create a substantial new supply of senior housing. By the way, the federal government used to do this. And this is yet another example where cities have to take matters into their own hands, because right now the cavalry from Washington ain't coming. That's why we need a very aggressive plan. We have to challenge the real estate industry, requiring them to create affordable housing.
Mr. Loda.
Senior citizens are under siege in this city. If they own a home, they're seeing their assessed values go up and up and up, and we're not seeing any increase in the senior credit program that exists. We need to make sure that our seniors who are on fixed incomes do not get assessed values that go up double-digit like they have been going up over the last 10 years. It's forcing them to leave the city of New York. It's forcing them to live in poverty. We need to do the same thing for senior citizens who are renters. Not all of them are in subsidized housing. Those that are in market rate housing and are on fixed incomes, they are actually seeing their rents go up. You know what the #1 driver of rent increases is lately? The increase in assessed values and the 300% increase over the last 10 years in water bills. We have to get it under control.
Jorge?
If New York City's undocumented immigrants could vote, why would they want to support you over your opponent, Mr. Loda?
If undocumented citizens had the right to vote, they would vote for me for the following reasons. I will expand the number of jobs in this city. I will making sure that they can become employable. I will start a municipal ID card so that they can get on the road to be mainstreamed in the state and city of New York. I will also do everything I possibly can to make sure that the bill in Washington that was passed by the Senate that gave a path towards citizenship goes through the House and is put on the president's desk so it can be implemented. That comprehensive reform is so important. And then finally, I will also make sure that the executive order that first started by Mayor Ed Koch and continued by all mayors is signed. It is very important that immigrants, regardless of their status, have access to health care, public health, as well as their children having access to education.
Thank you. Mr. de Blasio.
We may be on the verge of our second kumbaya moment, but let's check here. I agree with Joe on the executive order. I agree with Joe on the need for comprehensive immigration reform at the national level. And I think the next mayor of New York City has to fight intensely to get that done. It would be a major commitment for me. I agree with Joe on the municipal ID card, so undocumented folks could have access to library cards, signing leases, doing all of the things, bank accounts, the things that people need to do every day in this city. I also think the state of New York should pass the bill that would provide a driver's license for undocumented individuals who pass the test like the rest of us. I think that's something necessary so people can actually live their lives in the city.
And
I literally don't know if Mr. Loda agrees with that or not.
Do you
I agree with
that?
driver's licenses as long as they pass the test, but driver's licenses as an ID card, no, I don't want to use the Department of Motor
Driver's
Vehicles.
licenses if they pass the test to drive.
To drive.
At the city level, that's why I believe we should have the city ID as that pure ID form.
And there are others who want to have the Department of Motor Vehicle as the ID function.
Now,
Not a
are
good
you
idea.
in favor of allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections?
I've talked to the advocates on that issue. They've presented their plan to me. I'm not comfortable with it at this point. There's a number of issues. I am not. It's I think an idea that is founded in good intent, but there's a number of specifics that I can't agree with, at least as it's written now.
I'm comfortable with my position. Only American citizens should be allowed the right to vote.
All right, gentlemen, we now come to that portion of the debate that is a favorite of both of you, and that's the lightning round.
We've been waiting all night for it.
I know you have. This is, we'll ask you a series of questions.
Please, more lightning round.
Going to ask you
Better than singing.
There you go. Better than singing. Absolutely better than singing.
Yeah. We're going to ask you to give one-word answers or as close to that as possible. So we'll begin. What household income range do you consider middle class in New York City to be? We'll start with you, Mr. de Blasio.
I think middle class begins certainly nowadays over 50 or 60,000. I think below that, it's very hard to make ends meet in this city.
Mr. Loda.
I think it starts a little bit higher than that. It's about 75,000. We need to know how many children they have, but quite honestly, $75,000 a year is at the very, very bottom of the middle class.
Mr. Loda, what does your family spend on groceries each month?
About 125, about $400, maybe $450.
Mr. de Blasio?
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best because the other members of the family have been focused on the grocery shopping lately. I haven't been doing my fair share. Something else has been going on the last year. I think we're in that similar range.
All right. What is your monthly mortgage, Mr. de Blasio?
About $3,300, I think, last time I checked.
Mr. Loda?
I don't have a mortgage. It's been paid off.
All right. Should smoking be banned on city sidewalks, Mr. Loda?
Smoking should be banned within a certain number of feet of doors, whether it's a front door of a building or a front door of a house. No, it shouldn't be banned on all city streets, but not in
city sidewalks. Yeah. Okay. Mr. de Blasio?
Should it be banned on all sidewalks?
Yeah.
It should be banned where people congregate.
Have you ever let your children drink alcohol underage, Mr. de Blasio?
I will say this. The Italian tradition allows for a small amount of wine to be consumed with the meal.
All right.
Sometimes with water.
Mr. Loda?
No.
Okay. Have you ever used an illegal drug other than marijuana, Mr. Loda?
No.
Mr. de Blasio?
No.
Would you locate city offices in One World Trade, formerly known as the Freedom Tower, Mr. de Blasio?
I haven't specifically thought of that, honestly. I'm most focused on trying to get offices to all 5 boroughs. I'd certainly look at that.
All right, great.
I agree we need to get offices to all 5 boroughs, but the per square footage for the World Trade Center is way too high for the city government. It's the people's money. We're not going to waste it in a Class A building like that.
Real quickly, if you could get one musical performer to appear at your inauguration, who would it be, Mr. Loda?
The Allman Brothers.
Mr. de Blasio.
Bruce Springsteen.
Okay, all right, simple enough. All right, that's going to be the last question.
Do you have a relationship with him? Because maybe you can make the call for me.
I certainly don't. No. That's the last question for this broadcast here on Channel 4. Thank you, candidates. However, the debate's not over. Right now, you want to flip to one of these channels where we're airing a bonus half hour. We're going to dig into more issues. And that part of the debate airs on Cozy TV as well as WNYE. Now, you can find Cozy on Time Warner 161, Verizon 460, Cablevision 109, Comcast 248, and RCN 28. We're also streaming the bonus half hour live online on NBCNewYork.com, WSJ.com, and TelemundoNewYork.com.
And on behalf of News 4 New York, Telemundo Nueva York, and the Wall Street Journal, we thank you for watching the mayoral debate, and we hope you now have what you need to make an informed decision 1 week from today, actually next Tuesday on Election Day. The bonus half hour begins in just a few moments. Have a great night.
From News 4 New York, this is a special presentation, Decision 2013, the New York City mayoral debate, jointly sponsored by NBC4 New York, Telemundo Nueva York, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York City Campaign Finance Board.
And so for the next 30 minutes, we're going to dig deeper into some issues and ask some of your questions that have been coming in through Twitter using the hashtag NYC2013. And a big issue in social media for us is unions. So, Michael, we're going to start off the questioning with you.
So both of you have declined on the campaign trail to discuss how you will tackle one of the biggest issues facing New York City, the fact that 153 unions have no contracts and want raises, including retroactive raises that could cost billions. What makes you qualified to negotiate these contracts? And tell us when, if ever, you have said no to a union demand. Mr. de Blasio, we're going to start with you.
Well, one of the things that makes me qualified is I'm smart enough to know not to negotiate these things in public. We have to have a respectful, honest, blunt negotiation with each and every union. You do that in private. You don't do it through the media. You don't put preconditions on it if you expect it to actually succeed and then be voted on by the members of those unions affirmatively. I've worked with the labor movement over the last 20 years. Plenty of times I've had to say no to different demands by labor unions, but I also have developed the respectful relationships that allow for an honest dialogue. That's the kind of thing that could get something done, including the reforms we need and the cost savings we need. You know what the ironic reality of the Bloomberg years is? After all of the bluster, particularly in the last few years, directed at the teachers and other public workers, Mayor Bloomberg hasn't achieved new cost savings. He hasn't achieved major reforms. In fact, he didn't get any contracts done. So I think it actually takes a respectful and positive relationship and a willingness to scrupulously keep private the negotiations to actually get this done.
Mr. Lota?
Negotiations have to be private. My experience, however, is both on the public side and on the private side. I helped negotiate part of the contract with DC 37 back in '94, '95. Same with the sanitation workers, same with the PBA. I have the experience to do it. I've done it before. I'll do it again. On the private side, when I went to work at Madison Square Garden, by the way, Madison Square Garden is a 100% union shop. I work with the stagehands. I work with the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 3, to make sure that they have positive deals going forward. And we work together. Did we agree on everything? No. Did we compromise? Absolutely. And that's what you need to be prepared to do. Go to the table, be open, be honest, be tough, and make sure that it moves forward. I also negotiated the part of the project labor agreement in the renovation of Madison Square Garden, a 100% union job that the company spent its own money on, $1 billion.
Mr. Lota, you have said no to retroactive raises. Mr. de Blasio, you've said that you would leave that as an option on the table. What does this stance say about your opponent? Mr. Lota, let's start with you.
Well, you know what it says about my opponent, which is really interesting, and he's not going to think this is a nice thing to say, but let me just go forward. Look, he's a polished politician. He's an established politician. He knows the money's not there. So what he says, if I can find the money, I will pay it. I've heard him say that before. Look, when you look at the books, it's not there. Why isn't it there? Mayor Bloomberg, Speaker Quinn used the entire labor reserve last year to balance the budget. It's unconscionable what's happened here, and the money is not there. If the money's not there, how are we going to pay for it? I will not raise taxes to be able to meet prior payments.
Mr. de Blasio, what does this say about your opponent?
First of all, once again, my opponent is mischaracterizing my position. I said, one, on the retro, there's no way in the world to pay out the full amount. That's estimated as much as $7 to $8 billion, and that's impossible to find. I've said we would look at retro only if we could find cost savings, and it would be incumbent upon the unions that want to talk about retroactive pay to help us find the additional cost savings necessary to pay for that. So I've been very clear. We have to get contracts done next year. We have to work productively and privately with each union to get it done. If they want to talk about retroactive pay, that's their right, but they have to show us the cost savings to go with it.
So both of you have succeeded here in not giving us any specifics. So are you asking voters to just blindly trust you that you're going to be able to handle this, Mr. de Blasio?
What I'm saying to voters in this city is I have been, over the last 20 years, involved in the creation of city budgets. I've been involved in constant dealings with labor unions over legislation and a whole host of other issues. I know how to work with them to a respectful and realistic outcome. If the people of this city want to see these open labor contracts settled, and I know they do, if they're as frustrated as I am, and I think Joe is, with the fact that Mayor Bloomberg left all these labor contracts open, then it's actually the right thing to do to not lay out a negotiating strategy in public, but to wait till we get to the table and then work productively with labor to get it done.
Mr. Lota, blind trust?
Discussing this in public is not the right thing to do. I have negotiated in the past, both in the private sector and the public sector. I've been tough, but I've been fair with the unions. You can go talk to any one of the union leaders about it. Here's the issue. Mr. de Blasio has never negotiated a contract before. In fact, what concerns me is that he's so aligned with the unions. How is he going to make sure that he's protecting the people of the city of New York?
You know, I just have to say, I have had, in the time I've spent in public life, plenty of disagreements with the labor movement. I've managed to be respectful, but still make clear that I can't agree to the things I think aren't in the public's interest. And I'll continue with that pattern: independence, clarity, and respect. But by the way, if you want to get something done, and this is the crucial thing we have to learn from the last few years of the Bloomberg administration, if you want to get something done, you actually have to build that respectful relationship. You have to have firm, clear demands on both sides and work out something that's in the people's interest. If you bluster, if you put it all out in public, it may feel good emotionally, but it's not going to get anything done for the people or the taxpayers.
Mr. de Blasio, real quickly, I mean, we're hearing over and over again from Mr. Lota. He says that you're untested. Some people have accused you of being indecisive. What can you tell voters who question whether or not you can handle something like the unions or handle a crisis like a terrorist attack or another Sandy?
Again, I am very, very proud of over 20 years in public service. I'm proud of having worked in the Clinton administration as a senior housing official. I'm proud of having been Hillary Clinton's campaign manager when she ran for U.S. Senate. I'm proud of the years I've spent in the city council and as a citywide official, as public advocate, working on all the issues of concern to New Yorkers over the last 4 years. I understand what it takes to make this city run. I understand the people. I understand what people need right now. And actually, what I hear most from people is they want a mayor who's going to be on their side, fighting for them every day, and paying attention to all 5 boroughs in every kind of neighborhood. And that's what I'm ready to do.
All right.
He has absolutely no experience. Look at the mid-level jobs that he's had. Look, I've been deputy mayor. I was the budget director of the city of New York. I ran the MTA. During those period of times, we had crises, some man-made, some Mother Nature. I was able to get those organizations back up and running. You know, I did it with respect. I did it in a way that the workers were charged up and willing to do it, and they did it in a great way on behalf of the people of the city of New York. You can't compare my experience with his lack of experience.
Well, I have to say, respectfully, you have to look at the values that each of us brings to this. Mr. Lota has clearly made his campaign about tax breaks for corporations and the wealthy. He wants to continue failed policies like the current approach to stop and frisk. He really doesn't want to disrupt the status quo in the city that's not working for a huge number of our citizens. And the administration he served in, as we talked about last time, was known for dividing New Yorkers, not bringing them together. So it's not just which job titles you've held. It's what are your values, what do you believe in, and what are you going to do?
Mr. Lota, can I just ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
You served under Mayor Giuliani for quite a few years. His administration was viewed by some as being divisive and polarizing. Does this view have merit? And should you be held accountable for any of that since you were a key leader in his administration?
Here's what has merit. Here's what has merit. Crime dropped significantly. Murder went down over 40%. Quality of life increased. The streets were cleaned. There were no race riots like there was during
that is the
Dinkins
case,
administration.
and Mayor Giuliani also got a lot of credit for being decisive in a crisis. But the question was whether or not you deserve any accountability for the divisiveness that some people perceived in the Giuliani
I don't agree with the
administration.
divisiveness, because the divisiveness that existed was minute in compared to all of the great things that happened.
Well, that's...
And I am inextricably linked with the Giuliani administration, and I am proud of it.
He, with all due respect to Mr. Lota, he obviously does not understand what millions of New Yorkers experienced during the Giuliani years, where they felt it was overt divisiveness from their own mayor, where they felt that communities were pitted against each other.
Be specific. Be specific.
Look at what happened in the Giuliani years. The Dorisman case is a great example. The mayor's response to the Dorisman case further divided an already tense city. He was unapologetic about accusing a victim, a guy who lost his life. The mayor was unapologetic about it. One of many, many times when the mayor was insensitive to people of color in this si
I just don't
there's
see,
nothing wrong with that?
I don't think that's divisive at all. There is nothing
if you don't
divisive.
think that the mayor's comments in that time about Dorisman, if you don't see that those were divisive and problematic, it's another
Not for
example of
millions
why,
of New
despite your much ballyhooed resume, you don't understand what life in the city is like and what people in the city need.
Look, I was born in the city as you were. I lived here till I was 13 years old. I came back after school. I know what it means to be a New Yorker. When my parents had me as a kid, they were, quite honestly, they were poor. They had to work 2 jobs, my father 3 jobs, and my mother 2 jobs. Listen, I know what it's like to be in poverty. I know what it's like to aspire to be in the middle class, and my father was able to do that because he got a union job as a New York City cop. Don't tell me I don't know what it means to be a New Yorker.
Let me be clear.
How's things in Cambridge lately?
I am happy that Mr. Lota's family got to participate in the American dream. And what I've been talking about throughout this campaign is hoping that more and more New Yorkers get to have that experience in this generation, but 46% of New Yorkers, unfortunately, are at or near the poverty level. We're not talking about whether people get that opportunity in this particular instance. We're talking about the question of divisiveness. A mayor is supposed to bring us together. A mayor like Mayor LaGuardia, being the best example we've ever had, is supposed to be a unifier and help ease the tensions in the most diverse city in the world. Mayor Giuliani, unfortunately, time and time again, divided the city. And the fact that Mr. Lota doesn't even seem to understand that history occurred is another indication of why he's not going to be in a position to bring the people of the city together today.
I have brought the people of the city together time and time again. And you know what? If you look at the number of murders there were during the Dinkins administration, you play that out without a reduction in crime, you're talking about 24,000 New Yorkers, 75 to 80% of which would be African American or Latino men. Look, let's talk about what we did to lift the city up, to make it a better city, to make it a city where people can get jobs. Look, he keeps talking about the American dream, and I've lived the American dream, there's no doubt about it. There's no job plan on his part. There's work, there are various different job training programs, but let me tell you, it is not fair to train somebody for a job if you don't create the job.
All right, at this point, we'd like to give you another chance to ask questions of each other. Your answer should be limited to 60 seconds, and we're going to begin with you, Mr. Lota.
Sure. Last week, Mr. de Blasio, I asked you a question and you didn't answer it. You served in the administration of David Dinkins during a period of time, as I just said, that there were 2,000 murders per year. During that time, there was also the last time we had a race riot in the city of New York. You have acknowledged that you received phone calls from the community. Bill Lynch, under oath, said no one spoke to him about conversations from the community. Mayor Dinkins has done the same thing. Tell me, did you sit on that information? And if you didn't sit on that information, what did you do with it? And if you did sit on that information, what does it say about what you'll be like in a crisis?
You know, Mr. Lota has attempted time and time again to recast history. I've said very clearly and consistently I was at City Hall in that time. My job involved being at City Hall, not being at the front line where these events were taking place. And the information I received, I did pass along. It's as simple as that. But the bottom line is what we really need to talk about is where we're going in the future. If we want to get away from a divided past, we need a mayor who's going to unify very consistently, very constantly focus on unifying this city, bringing the relationship between police and community back together, which we can do, and it will make us safer for the long term, but only if we're ready to make real reform. Again, my opponent doesn't talk about a vision for how to bring us back together. My opponent seems to not even understand we were divided in the Giuliani years. I put forward a real vision for a more united city, a safe city, a city where we can move together towards an opportunity for economic fairness again. And that's what the people of this city are looking for. And by the way, to the question of job training, as I just said moments ago, there are thousands and thousands of jobs available, but people don't have the training for them. We owe it to them to get them that training.
Mr. de Blasio, it's your turn to ask a question.
Well, here's what I want to say, Mr. Lota. You know, I remember my history and the notions of tax breaks for the wealthy, tax breaks for corporations. That's trickle-down economics. That's classic Republican thinking. That was classic thinking during the Reagan administration, the Bush administration. Didn't work out so well. I'm trying to understand why these policies, which have hurt our country and hurt New York City, why Mr. Lota suddenly thinks trickle-down economics is going to work this time.
It's not trickle-down economics. You know, these comments about attaching me to the National Republican Party and all of that, it reminds me of that boxing match between Rocky and Drago. I mean, quite honestly, we know what happened in that match. The underdog won. New York loves an underdog, and quite honestly, I am that underdog. There's no question about it. And New York is going to love what I'm going to talk about and what I'm going to say and what my vision is. Quite honestly, I said it last week, we are one bad mayor away from unsafe streets, continued failing schools, and fiscal chaos.
So
I actually believe, you get your chance, I actually believe that I have the experience to keep this city safe and secure and solvent. And all the words that he wants to use in no way, shape, or form is going to tie me to the National Party. My vision for the future is one in which New York City is a city of opportunity. It is a city that will allow everyone to grow. I want to create jobs so that those who are unemployed can get jobs. That's what I want to do. And that is my vision for the future. I want everybody on the road of the American dream again. I want this to be the city of opportunity He doesn't.
I appeal to my friends in the media. I didn't get an answer to my question. It's trickle-down economics. If you believe in tax breaks as a way to spur the economy, if you believe in giving more money to the wealthy, more money to corporations, that is trickle-down economics. It was a Reagan and Bush policy. Why do you think it's going to work in New York City today?
You don't know
it
what
failed before. Why is it going to work now?
You want to know what trickle-down is? Trickle-down is saying, I'm only going to tax the rich, when in fact you're going to end up not only taxing the rich, but you're going to be taxing the middle class. Like I said last week, those of you in the middle class, don't believe him. He's coming after your wallet.
Mr. de Blasio,
wait. We all agree that tax cuts for the wealthy and for corporations is classically trickle-down economics. It is a Republican economic strategy. The New York Times said so the other day. Why are you denying that? And if you think it's such a great policy, explain why, if it failed consistently on the national level, why would it work here? I'm just asking you that.
The reason why I talk about cutting taxes is to provide the investment and the incentive to create jobs.
And that's the same policy that's failed nationally. You do agree it's failed nationally,
I don't agree it's failed nationally.
So the Bush tax cuts
How many jobs were created during the Reagan
administration? The Bush tax cuts.
How many jobs were created during the Reagan administration and the growth that this country had?
Mr. de Blasio, Mr. Lota has mentioned twice in this debate that he thinks you're also going to raise taxes on the middle class. Can you just take 15 seconds to address that?
I'd be very happy to. I'd like to remind everyone he just extolled the virtue of the Reagan administration's tax plan, which once again points out his adherence to trickle-down economics. I have said one tax is what I'm focused on. A tax on people who make $500,000 or more for the next 5 years, specifically for full-day pre-K for every child in the city and after-school programs for middle school kids. That's it.
I'm going to give you a final word on that because I think perhaps you were stepped on a little bit. Go ahead, Mr. Lota.
You know, quite honestly, there's not been one career politician in this country who has said, I'm only going to tax the rich without also taxing the middle class.
All right, all right. Well, listen, you both have kind of alluded to this. We've been monitoring our social media. We asked people to kind of send us in questions, and the theme is that clearly you can both be linked with a previous administration. So many of our viewers are wondering, given a choice, do you believe voters prefer a Dinkins or Giuliani state of the city? And we'll go first to you, Mr. de Blasio.
I think voters are looking ahead. I think they're not caught up in what the city was like 20 years ago. They want to talk about solutions today. So what I think they look at here is a Republican philosophy and a Democratic philosophy, a conservative philosophy and a progressive philosophy, really profound differences. And I think the response I've gotten from people all over the city is they want progressive change. They certainly want to get away from the failed policies of the Bloomberg years that did not address the economic reality of people in the city, the affordable housing crisis, the fact that 46% of New Yorkers are at or near poverty. You know, I've talked about a tale of two cities throughout this election simply to say we have an inequality problem and we have to address it and we have tools to address it. Mr. Lota seemed to say on Morning Joe the other day we didn't have an inequality problem. I've been saying for a year we have a profound inequality problem
Mr.
that has
Lota,
to be addressed.
how about that original question? Do you believe they would prefer a Dinkins or Giuliani?
People would rather have a period of time when murder is not at 2,000 per year. What happened after that with the Giuliani administration, the reduction in crime, the enhanced quality of life, the cleanliness in the city, the number of people who reduced on welfare because they were able to get jobs in the city of New York. Listen, I'll take the Giuliani years over the Dinkin years anytime. There's no reason to go back to that period of time, which was a horror.
Jorge Ramos, do you have a social media question?
Yes, absolutely. Here's another question from a voter watching right now. What would you do to address the number of sexual assaults in our city? Violence isn't just gun violence. Mr. Lota.
We need to, sexual assault and gun violence, is that what you said, two together? I missed the
They say violence is not just gun violence.
Violence is not just gun violence. There's no question about it. We've seen an increase in rape in this city in the first part of this year. We need to make sure that the resources of the NYPD are focused on those areas where we're seeing an increase in crime. I was out in Brooklyn at the 6-7 precinct. There was something like a 400% increase in just a 28-day period in that precinct in rape. So, you know, that level of violent crime needs to come down. We need to make sure that the police department develops strategies and make sure that they catch the people who are doing it. On top of that, we're also seeing an increase in violence against gays and lesbians in the city of New York. That is an area that needs to be dealt with. They are New Yorkers just like everybody else, and we need to focus on making sure that they can walk down the streets not in fear at any time.
Mr. de Blasio.
Yeah, I agree very much with what Mr. Lota is saying. First of all, about attacking the increase in sexual crimes, also about attacking this horrible spate of crimes against members of the LGBT community. Look, I think some of the answer is similar in both cases. Mayoral leadership matters a lot. making sure that we're constantly out in communities, telling people how much we're going to make sure the enforcement is there and the resources are there. A visible show of strength by the NYPD wherever we see these trends. More education for people at the community level about how they can protect themselves and how they can work with the police to stop these negative trends. And more of a community policing approach. I want to make sure we get as many cops on the beat. We have 34,000 plus cops. I know we can get more on the beat, and I know, again, if we repair the relationship between police and community in many of our neighborhoods, we're also going to get a lot more information on who the perpetrators are so we can catch them.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Michael Howard-Saul with a question about health care.
Healthcare experts and state officials say New York City is too reliant on hospitals for primary care. When is it appropriate to close down a hospital that is losing money and some have argued propping up an unsustainable model for healthcare? Mr. de Blasio, let's start with you.
The idea is to try and make each local healthcare facility work more effectively. So it's not the goal to close them, it's the goal to fix them. You know, I was involved in the effort to save St. Vincent's Hospital. One of the things that galls me about that whole episode is that Mount Sinai Hospital was ready to come in, take over the facility. It was going to be a smaller facility, but still with crucial services for the community. Mount Sinai was ready to do it. You know what we lacked? Gubernatorial leadership and mayoral leadership. And if we had had that leadership, St. Vincent's would be open today. It would be in a different form, and the budget would work because it was in a different form. But it would be serving the community right this minute. So the goal is to take our existing healthcare facilities, protect them, make sure that healthcare is available locally, because if it's not available in a way that people can access locally, they don't get healthcare. But we can fix the cost problems in the process.
Mr. Lota, do you agree with what Mr. de Blasio just said, and what are your thoughts on this issue?
I have a different approach on health care. If you look at what's going on all throughout the United States, healthcare systems are building what are called urgent care centers. The perfect example of it is up in the Bronx. The coordination of the hospitals in the Bronx, as well as the city hospitals up there, they've created now 13 urgent care centers all throughout the Bronx. Hospitals aren't closing there. People are getting great health care in the Bronx. We need to do the same thing in Brooklyn. We need to do the same thing in Queens, where hospitals keep closing. We absolutely need to do it here in New York. There really is only one hospital south of 14th Street right now, and it's really an unfortunate and I think dangerous situation. So once you build the urgent care centers, then people will feel comfortable that they're getting health care. You can go in any one of these urgent care centers up in the Bronx. You can get a broken leg dealt with. You can get some minor surgery related. You can get outpatient surgery related. And it helps overall on what's going on. Look at the model in the Bronx. That's what we need to do throughout the city of New York. Let's focus these healthcare institutions on their patients.
Thank you, Mr. Lota. Jorge Ramos with a question about parks.
Should relatively wealthy nonprofits that maintain city parks, such as the Central Park Conservancy, be forced to share their donations with parks that get fewer donations? Mr. Lota.
No, they should not. We need to create a Parks Conservancy citywide, possibly with the Parks Foundation, which was started over 25 years ago, which was there to help get private money and help certain parks. Look, if you tell the folks who donated to a specific park that part of your money is going to be diverted to other parks, my gut feeling is, based on my real-world experience, is that there would be a decline. What we need to do is focus all of New York on the issue of why parks, all parks, are needed to be in great condition. Parks enhance our quality of life. There is absolutely no doubt about it. I want to make sure that our parks are clean. I want to make sure that our parks have good capital programs. I want to make sure that every kid has an opportunity to have a playground to play in within 10 minutes of where they live. We need to do that, and we need to get the rich people in this city to focus on the entire city.
Mr. de Blasio.
You know, our parks, for a lot of people in the outer boroughs, for a lot of people in less wealthy neighborhoods, it's one of the centers of their lives. It's where their kids play. It's where, bluntly, a lot of families, in effect, get to go for their summer vacation because they can't afford to go anyplace else. So we've got a lot more to help parks in less wealthy neighborhoods, particularly in the outer boroughs. And I think the notion of linking these conservancies that are doing quite well, like the Central Park Conservancy, to one or more parks that's less advantaged, I think that's a promising notion. I think if you talk to folks who are the donors, I actually think a lot of them are very generous people. I think there are a lot of people who care about New York City as a whole. And I think they can be convinced that taking some of that money even a small percentage, and giving it to other parks would be helpful. It's an idea worth pursuing, and a citywide conservancy might be a good model as well. You know, what's not acceptable is the status quo, where a few parks do well, but unfortunately many parks in the outer boroughs are suffering for lack of maintenance.
Thank you. Melissa.
Gentlemen, many museums and cultural institutions throughout the city are fearful right now that they're losing a fierce supporter and personal contributor to their organizations in City Hall with Mayor Bloomberg departing. What specifically are your plans to support the arts, beginning with Mr. de Blasio?
I think I can speak for Mr. Loda as well by saying that we are not billionaires and we're not in a position to personally contribute that which Michael Bloomberg has. And I commend him. You know, I've had my differences with the mayor, but I commend him for his generosity towards cultural institutions. I think we're going to have a tough few years in terms of our fiscal situation because of the open labor contracts, because of the situation in Washington with the sequester and the government shutdown, et cetera. So I've been honest with the cultural institutions. I'm not going to make commitments about new funding anytime soon. With the funding we have, we should protect. But I also think as we go forward, one of the things we have to do is make sure there's fairness towards outer borough cultural institutions, towards more grassroots cultural institutions. You know, all of them make up the fabric of New York City. All of them are part of why we're so attractive to tourists and part of neighborhood vitality. So making sure there's that balance as we move forward is crucial.
Thank you. Mr. Loda?
I tell the cultural institutions that in spite of the fact that we're embarking on difficult financial times, I will not cut their current budgets. They want to know how much will be increased, what inflation rate it would be, and anything like that. I look at our cultural institutions in a couple of different ways. They're actually educational institutions. Our children need to take advantage of them and need to go there. I also think that they're a magnet for tourists that come to New York City. The 53 million tourists that come to New York City, significant high percentage of them go to our museums. I want to work with NYC and Company to start marketing the museums that are outside of Manhattan. Too few people go outside of Manhattan, and we have wonderful museums outside. They are critically important, and I don't want them to be a pawn in the budget dance that goes on every year. It's been going on for 25 years. Well, we have to stop.
Just a quick follow-up for each of you. Would you have used city funds to help City Opera stay alive, Mr. de Blasio?
I can't say that I would have. I value the history of the City Opera quite a bit. It was actually Fiorello LaGuardia helped to found it as opera for the people, and as an Italian-American, I value opera. But honestly, in this fiscal environment, I don't think we could have devoted city funds.
Mr. Loda, yes or no?
I would not have supported.
Thank you.
All right. Next question coming from Michael Howard Saul.
So Mayor Bloomberg and past New York mayors have been staunch allies of Israel. Would you be a similar friend to Israel as mayor, and how? Mr. Loda, you're up first.
Absolutely. I'd be a staunch defender of Israel. I always have been. I always will be. They have the right to exist. Anyone who wants to interfere or threaten them, they're basically threatening me as well. Under no circumstances do I want to see anybody successfully threaten Israel. I will continue to make sure that they are properly received both in Washington, and I also want everyone to make sure that there's no better friend to the United States than Israel.
Mr. de Blasio?
Look, the mayor of New York City, and this is what I do as mayor, it's a sacred responsibility to speak up for and defend the state of Israel. There's no closer relationship on earth, literally no closer relationship than that between New York City and the state of Israel. It's under constant attack. We have to stand up for it. And by the way, I think there's a lot we can do. One of the things I did as public advocate was start the Iran watch list that literally pointed out that there were international companies with business in America, with a great, thriving, profitable business in America, that were doing business with the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Islamic Republican Guards. And the fact is that when international businesses are profiting while helping a country that is an enemy of the United States, a threat to the United States, and a threat to Israel, that's unacceptable. That's an example of what you can do with the bully pulpit here in this city to defend Israel's interests.
Very quickly, are there any world leaders who you would oust from a city venue in the same way that Rudy Giuliani kicked Yasser Arafat out of a concert?
You know, we are the home of the United Nations, and I take that very seriously. I can disagree with world leaders. Obviously, Ahmadinejad was here last year, and what he has said disgusts me. But we have to honor the fact that as the world capital, as the home of the United Nations, we have to bring people here whether we agree with them or not.
Mr. Loda, any world leaders who...
There may be some, but I disagree with Bill on one particular area. Where Arafat was thrown out was a city-funded concert. He was not invited. He showed up. He was asked to leave. He didn't leave. He was thrown out. I'd do it again today. He's a murderer, was a murderer. He's now passed, thank goodness. And quite honestly, if there's another world leader who is an established murderer who wants to go to any one of our facilities other than where he's sleeping and going to the United Nations, I will have a problem with that.
Gentlemen, you've both put in some long days and nights on the campaign trail, spending part of this one with us, right where you want to be. Your message has been all over the airwaves. Your agenda's, it's out there. It's pretty much front and center. But do you feel here, as we stand just days out now from the election, that there are any misconceptions about either of you, that there's anything you'd like to clear up for the voters right now and set the record straight on anything? And I guess we'll begin with you, Mr. de Blasio.
Well, I feel very good about the pace of this campaign, or how this campaign has resulted. I think there's been a very, very thorough debate. And as I said, I've been a part of over 70, I think it is, forums and televised debates of every kind. So I think my message has gotten out of addressing this crisis in our city of inequality, the tale of two cities. I think some people have tried to say that tale of two cities is divisive. And what I've said time and time again is, no, acknowledging the problems, acknowledging the inequalities so we can address them. In fact, that's in all of our interests, asking that we not continue to be a city where 46% of people are at or near poverty, or where our school system is failing so many of our kids. Bringing that out in the open is actually part of addressing the problem and solving it.
I want to make sure Mr. Loader gets the equal amount of time. Go ahead, Mr. Loader.
Sure. I think the message about how I started and my humble beginnings and my family being in level of poverty, being able to build up, is not a message that's gone out there. Yes, I have been successful in my career. I am the epitome of the American dream. It's what I want for all New Yorkers. That message isn't getting out there enough. I need to make sure it gets out there a lot. And you're right, somebody does think the tale of two cities is divisive. I'm that person. The message about the tale of two de Blasios, that's not getting out there.
All right. Joe Lhota and Bill de Blasio, we'd like to thank you for being here tonight. That concludes the last mayoral debate in Decision 2013. Election day is Tuesday. The polls are open from 6 in the morning until 9 at night.
The Campaign Finance Board has created the mobile site nycvotes.org to make sure New Yorkers have everything they need on Tuesday. It helps voters locate their nearest polling site and see sample ballots.
We thank Michael Howard and Jorge Ramos. We hope after tonight you have a better understanding of the candidates and their position on important issues that impact this city. But above all, be sure to vote and have a good night.